So it's getting to that time of year where we look at the people who have had good and people who have had bad years. And very often it's far more amusing to look at the people who have had bad years rather than sort of a good year. And let's face it, if Putin had not pursued the war in Ukraine, there would be articles after article probably written, and there certainly are, because I think there is a valid case to be made. If you were to go internationally, who is the loser of the year? It's certainly Putin. If you go this year in the UK alone, certainly the loser of the year is Liz Truss. let's not mince any straws here. She would be certainly making it to the certainly into the number 2 position in many of these lists, because the absolute loser is Putin, absolutely, this year, no doubt. And let's face it, Truss gave it her best shot. She lost to a lettuce. As a lot of people have said, if the Queen had not died, her 44 days in office would have been even shorter. So, yeah, take that for what you will, but I fully agree with this. And like I say, I've seen other people cover this article as well. So you'll probably forgive me if you've seen this. Other people go over this as well. But to be honest, I think this is a message that does need amplifying and certainly needs repeating. That Putin is the biggest loser of the year. Now, I hope next year that the war in Ukraine does come to an end, but I would also not be surprised if it does not end next year either. But again, my hope is that it does. But we're going to go into this because I think this is something that does, in a case, need celebrating. Putin's an absolute loser, and I think this is the time of year to celebrate such people being the absolute losers that they are. So let's go diving into this then, shall we? So, as is always, before we do go into this, please do remember to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all the people who do help and support the channel. And of course, down below there are links to the YouTube Pony Club and of course the YouTube thank you button as well. So let's go diving on into this then, shall we? So this comes from the Atlantic Council with the title of Vladimir Putin, 2022 Loser of the Year. For the first time since the event was launched a decade ago, Vladimir Putin will not hold his flagship end-of-year press marathon. The surprise cancellation is the latest indication that all is not well in the Kremlin. For the past 10 years, Putin's annual press marathon had been a carefully circulated propaganda spectacle, allowing the Russian dictator to demonstrate his mastery of world affairs. However, with his invasion of Ukraine unraveling amid unprecedented losses and mounting military defeats, Putin is clearly in no mood to face even the most docile of audiences. While Putin hides from the cameras, his arch rival is ending the year on a wave of international acclaim. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has already been named Person of the Year by an ever-expanding list of media outlets, including Time magazine and the Financial Times newspaper, and is now being routinely touted as one of the world's most influential politicians. Zelensky's raising profile is the recognition of his wartime leadership, and also it reflects the global admiration of Ukraine's courageous resistance to the Russian invasion. And I think, as I said at the beginning, we're celebrating, the loser that is, in this case, Putin. I think, Zelensky does also deserve to be recognized. And I am really glad that he is being, recognized as such. Because, your wartime leader, as we found out ourselves, certainly during World War II, where we had, Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, as many people said, great wartime leader, not a very good peacetime politician. Like I say, he lost, the following general election in 1945, 6, I believe it was. So yeah, your wartime leader does have a lot of impact on the country, and I think he has really, really, encapsulating, Ukraine's really truly courageous resistance to the Russian invasion. So, as much as we are, in this video, sort of laughing in the face of Putin, I think, someone like Zelensky does also deserve to be sort of celebrated and really, um, you know, he's going to go down as the new national figure in Ukraine. I think we've said this, numerous times before. Not only is he going to go down as a new national figure, but this also has really made even more Ukraine an even more signified a country. It's becoming now part of their national story, and I think that is really important to sort of Ukraine. And you will see this certainly go forward. The people who fought in this um, invasion will be celebrated for years to come as heroes, and quite rightly so. Um, Certainly by the Ukrainians. So, like I say, not only to Zelensky, but anyone else out there. If you are a Ukrainian, whether you are a civilian, your military personnel, whatever, like I say, you have certainly you've got my support. I know you've got the UK support as well, backing you on this. And yeah, like I say, congratulations, guys. I don't think we can let that that moment sort of pass. So, like I say, guys, thank you. You're doing such a fantastic job, guys. I don't know what else more to say than that. Really, keep up the good work. But anyway, back to this. Of course, the contrasting fortunes of the Russian and Ukrainian leaders has underlined the self-defeating folly of Putin's decision to launch Europe's biggest conflict since World War II. His original plan envisaged a short and victorious war that would extinguish Ukrainian independence and force the country permanently back into the Kremlin orbit. Instead, he now finds himself an international pariah with his country's reputation as a military superpower in tatters and his Ukrainian enemies looking forward with growing confidence to victory in a real prospect of a historic victory in the coming year. By almost any measure, Vladimir Putin is comfortably the biggest loser of 2022. Putin's woes can also be traced directly to the battlefields of Ukraine. His invading army has performed disastrously over the past 10 months and has lost a series of key engagements, including the Battle of Kiev, the Battle of Kharkiv, and the Battle of Kherson. More than 100,000 Russian soldiers are believed to have been killed or wounded, and while thousands of Russian tanks and armored vehicles have been captured or destroyed, of these losses, Putin has been forced to launch the country's first mobilization since 1945, a move that has destabilized Russia and brought the war home to a previously supportive domestic audience. So, yeah, um, this really has destabilized Russia. I mean, there's a lot of people out there, and there's videos out on YouTube about how Russia might generally break up into a series of like, I think it's like 12 or even like 15 different countries potentially. But no one, if you wind back the clocks to like a year ago, no one even thought this was even going to happen. And the idea that this was even going to happen was laughed at. I can't remember if we now sort of start to hear about maybe this was going to happen at this point. But yeah, to say we're here at this point and how quickly it all started to here we are now, just speaks to the the courageousness and the defense effort that Ukrainian sort of soldiers and the military have really put up, and also how supportive the public has also been of the defensive efforts against Russia. The civilian effort does, I think, not get mentioned enough when it comes to these discussions. A lot of people just really focus on the battlefield, but you've got to remember we've seen a lot of the focus of Putin, attacking civilians throughout all this conflict. So it does bear repeating that the resilience of the Ukrainian people should absolutely be celebrated during this time as well. But back to it. So Russia's international image has also been badly tarnished by revelations of a widespread war crimes committed against the Ukrainian civilian population. Russian troops stand accused of carrying out mass executions and engaging in sexual violence, abductions, and torture throughout occupied Ukraine. And that's also worth saying as well. We've heard stories of orphanages having to hide children because we've seen that the Russians, taking these kids and sending them off into Russian orphanages because Russia has a big depopulation problem. So some of these kids, we don't know if we'll ever see them again. I hope they do. Some are lucky enough, obviously, to have parents that will obviously go and look for them, but some might not be as lucky. Um, so for everyone that does get brought back, I do worry there might be a couple that don't. But where are we? So here we are. Millions of Ukrainians have been subjected to forced deportation, while politics of indiscriminate bombardment have left tens of thousands dead and reduced dozens of Ukrainian towns to cities to rubble. In recent months, Russia has begun the methodical destruction of Ukraine's civilian infrastructure with the express intention of depriving Ukrainians of access to heating, electricity, and water during the depths of winter. Many international observers see these policies as nothing short of genocide, especially as they have been accompanied by a steady stream of openly genocidal incentive from the regime of propagandists and the Kremlin officials in Moscow. Others have been appalled by Putin's readiness to engage in nuclear saber rattling. On multiple occasions, the Russian leader has issued thinly veiled threats, alluding to the possibility of the use of the country's vast atomic arsenal. The nuclear blackmail has provoked a strong backlash, with US officials promising a catastrophic consequences, and even the normal support of China rebuking Russia. And this is another thing that apparently came out. There was a big meeting between Biden and the Chinese. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was that we'd seen apparently the Chinese, who have made sort of connections in sort of drills with Russian generals, they have said to those generals, if Putin gives the order to launch the nukes, you should resist. You should say no. So that is very interesting to see that we've actually got China putting pressure on, Russian generals, saying if Putin gives the order, you should say no. So that is again China very clearly saying there is a clear red line and you should not cross it. So all this has left Russia more internationally isolated than any time since the immediate aftermath of the Bolshevik Revolution a century ago. In a revealing recent exchange, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov admitted, "Nobody likes us, and they don't intend to start liking us." Peskov may have had the Western world primarily in mind, but his comment also reflected the wider reality of Russia's increasingly unfavorable international position. Moscow's isolation is most immediately obvious at the United Nations, where a series of General Assembly votes condemning the invasion of Ukraine has passed with resounding majorities. Tellingly, only a handful of fellow pariahs, such as North Korea and Syria, have been prepared to stand with Russia. Close to home, the Kremlin is visibly losing influence through its former Soviet empire. In Central Asia, Kazakhstan is openly distancing itself from Russia while strengthening its ties with China. Turkey and the West in the South Caucasus, Azerbaijan is increasingly ignoring Russia's nominal role in the regional peacekeepers, while Armenia bristles over Moscow's failure to actually provide any meaningful protection. And that is also going to have big consequences, by the way, after this war. If a Russian breakup does happen, the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict is going to certainly increase in escalation. That is absolutely for sure. Back to it. So even the Belarusian dictator, Alexander Lukashenko, who depends almost completely on the Kremlin for his political survival, has also managed to resist the Russian pressure to directly participate in the invasion of Ukraine. On the wider international stage, the United States has succeeded in consolidating the Western support for Ukraine. Meanwhile, Putin's efforts to try and weaponize energy exports have backfired and forced European countries to turn decisively away from reliance on Russia. The BRICS nations of Brazil, India, China, and South Africa continue to purchase Russian resources, but are now doing so on heavily owned discounted terms. Beyond this pragmatic trade, they have refused to back Russia or even provide Moscow with much needed weapons. This has forced the Kremlin to seek replacement tanks, artillery shells, drones, and missiles from the likes of Iran and Belarus. Also, it doesn't add North Korea as well. Like, it has bought hundreds of thousands of artillery shells from North Korea. But even they are at a limit of how much, artillery they can supply. So, what can Putin look forward to in 2023? He appears to believe that the international alliance opposing his invasion may still eventually lose interest, pinning its hopes on Western leaders forcing Kiev into some kind of compromise deal that will allow Russia to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. However, with most of Ukraine's backers publicly stating that they will let the Ukrainians themselves decide when to negotiate, this outcome looks unlikely. After all, no Ukrainian government can conceivably condemn millions of their own compatriots to the horrors of indefinite Russian occupation. And that is true. We have seen what Russian occupation actually means to these people. We have seen what has happened in these liberated areas and the stories that have come out about Russian occupation. And it is absolutely right. No Ukrainian government could ever leave, thousands of their compatriots to, that indefinite Russian occupation. So let's finish this off then. So a far more realistic scenario would see the well-armed and highly motivated Ukrainian military continue to steadily liberate occupied territory, while Russia suffers heavy losses among its poorly trained and badly equipped conscript troops. This is a recipe for disaster for the Putin regime. The Russian army in Ukraine is already deeply demoralized and struggling to even mount localized offensives. Further attrition in the coming months will raise the prospect of a more comprehensive military collapse that could have grave consequences for the future of the Russian Federation itself. As we said before, there are numerous experts there talking about the Russian Federation may just collapse even more. It may just completely balkanize into different countries completely. So, as 2022 does draw to a close, it is obvious that Putin's fateful decision to invade Ukraine was one of the biggest geopolitical blunders of the modern era. And oh boy, was it. His dream of shattering the post-1991 settlement and rebuilding the Russian Empire has made him the single greatest threat to global security and placed him in direct confrontation with a formidable coalition of the world's most powerful nations, who have reluctantly come to recognize the necessity of his defeat. Putin enters 2023 with few friends and fewer options. The coming year is shaping up to be one of the darkest of his entire reign. It may also be the last, which, to be honest, is what we really, could hope for. But yeah, like I say, there you have, ladies and gentlemen, the case clearly made for Vladimir Putin being the 2022 loser of the year. Liz Truss gave it her best shot, but hey, let's face it, it goes to Putin clearly, very, very clearly in this case. And like I say, to any Ukrainians out there who may be watching, you certainly have my support. I know you have the UK support, and like I say, we will sort of continue to support you in whatever way we sort of possibly can. So, as always, guys, like I say, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, my one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, guys, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.